Hello and welcome to episode 1 of the Westcombe Project. I'm Sam Wilkin. The Westcombe Project is a 12-part podcast series following one family, one dairy farm down in Somerset as they move from a more traditional style of dairy all the way through to a pasture-led, regenerative style of cheese making. So great for the environment, great for the animal, turns out great for the people who work there too. But ultimately, the goal is to create a more delicious cheese. If you enjoy the Westcombe Project, make sure you subscribe today. There's even more food and farming content coming your way on this channel. Enjoy.
Manor Farm, which is the farm I started on, to the right, is called set stocked. So basically we've got a big area, about 3 or 4 fields, and we just keep moving the cows around. And you just don't have to think much about that. You know, you just think, is it wet in that field or was it there yesterday? And you just open the gate and let them out.
The whole idea of farming, you know, what is it all about? And really, I suppose it's about food production. But, you know, how do we actually produce that food and what do we do? And I suppose that the evolution of food production over the last 50, 60 years has been really focused on production and quantity and all these different things. And for good reason. You know, when you've got a starving population in the UK or anywhere around the world, it's very easy to make that argument to say, well, we need to produce more food.
Here we're doing this controlled grazing system. I had huge resistance from the rest of the team, or the older members, and they were saying, what we're doing works. Why change? You know, why change? And you've got these young chaps coming in saying, do all this, that, and the other.
This is a story that repeats itself everywhere, isn't it? Over and over again is this sort of but that's really interesting. I mean, how has that been, you know, to communicate that?
It's been tricky, to say the least. But you know, these Holsteins won't eat. They won't eat it. They won't do it. They won't. They you know. And you know, I've been working for you for a long time, and I know the cows eat the grass fast better when it's short. They won't eat when it's long. You'll get a lot of waste. It won't work, but you're mad. Anyway, so we did it on one farm, and it's working really well. But it's probably more thinking and more work.
Yeah.
I mean, Nick's going out there and measuring grass and all that. You know, the others probably don't think he's doing anything much, but he is. He's you know, it's years ago when we used to think that you're only working if you're shoveling shit with a fork and sweating.
Hello, I'm Sam Wilkin, otherwise known as Sellerman Sam. I'm a cheesemonger and podcaster, and I'm fascinated by cheese. But I'm even more fascinated by the people who make it and the places that it's made in, the way it's made. A bit of context. So this time last year, summer 2020, we're in the grip of the pandemic. Everyone's afraid for livelihoods, for their health. Through my Sellerman podcast, I spoke to different producers about how they were coping, that overused word, the way they were pivoting. It was a time of real stress for a lot of people. But it was also a time where people found they were able to step out of themselves and consider things in a different way. Much was made of birdsong in central London and the lack of planes in the sky. We became more in tune with the world around us. And people started asking questions about where their food was coming from. Because it's not just the COVID pandemic, this is in the wake of Brexit as well. People were starting to realise that our food systems are broken. The way we get our food, the quality of the food, the outside threat to our farmers from lower quality food coming in. All of these were subjects that were really starting to inform the general conversation. I was fascinated by cheese. I was speaking to cheesemakers, but I also started to speak to farmers. And I started to learn about methods of farming that were in fact regenerative. And someone I spoke to at that time was a guy called Nick Millard. Well, Nick is the herdsman at Westcombe Dairy, and he was telling me about their new path, their path towards a pasture-fed system that in fact regenerates the soil using complex herbal lays, grazing, cattle. The conversation so often revolves around the environment and biodiversity and human health, all of which are fundamental elements of this. The driving force was to make a more delicious cheese. So I got in touch with Tom Carver and I put an idea to him. For a long time, I've wanted to make a podcast that follows a single group of people in a single place over the course of a year, so that you, the listener, really get to experience the seasons. I said, look, can we do this at Westcombe Dairy? Can I come and bother you every month and create a programme? And he said yes, pretty much immediately, because he's that sort of guy. And so last month I went down to Westcombe Dairy and I spoke to Tom in his kitchen with birdsong flooding through the windows. And I went out into the pasture with his dad, Richard, and with Nick Millard. And really what we did is we began the conversation. We began to talk about the Westcombe Project.
It's bugged me a little bit about, like, well, why are we doing these particular things? Why is there constantly this kind of thirst for higher yield? Because and especially with making a raw milk cheese, what our premise in our business is, how do we make it taste better? This kind of quest for quality is constantly in the back of our minds, or certainly in the back of my mind, because it really goes back to marketing, I guess, and sales, because it's so much easier to sell something that's excellent rather than selling something that's really just good. So I think that's been a big focus, but then it's intertwined with so many different other challenges, moral challenges. We're extracting milk from a cow. So how do we do that in a really good way? Do we need to do that? I'd feel like, well, it depends on where you live and the environment that you live in, and because we've all got to eat. I'd prefer to actually, look at our environment and what grows really well, and then how can we make the most nutritious, balanced food from this particular area.
So you looked at the soil erosion and you looked at the chemicals, and I wasn't really happy with it, but it seemed everyone said, high yielding cows, you've got to have maize, you've got to have energy, you won't get them in calf. So anyway,
who does that benefit? That sort of received wisdom, that what you've just described, that sort of, high yielding cows have to be fed on X, Y and Z, high energy, etc. Who does that actually benefit? I mean, I'm assuming it's the people somewhere in the middle.
Well, it can be the feed people, but also probably we all thought it was the case. And then I met one or two people who weren't growing maize, and also the idea was that maize isn't quite so good for the cheese either. So that was probably the one of the main factors. It was, and then I went down one day. I was driving around, and there was all this soil eroding, because in those days you just left the maize stubble over the winter. Nowadays, a lot of the maize growers are actually now growing intercropping with grass. Which it doesn't happen so much, but it just seemed wrong, and so we stopped growing the maize. Everyone said your fertility will go, you won't get the cows in calf, and we had better fertility. It improved. I'd say last year was one of the best years for fertility we'd had, and now I'm thinking, should have done it years ago. I mean, it's easy. Hindsight,
but it seems like such an incredibly, nothing happens quickly in farming, but that's a pretty quick switch. Yeah. So how many years down the line would you say you'll start seeing something you could genuinely describe as evidence?
About 3 months, 4 months' time.
I mean, for a long time as well, I was having these chats with Dad around the kitchen table about so what is it that we're doing? Why do we replant this? What would happen if we let everything kind of go wild? And he'd be saying, well, you look at the field names, you've got marsh ground is called marsh ground because it was a marsh, and cows don't like eating marshy things, or your yield would drop so dramatically that you wouldn't be able to actually afford to employ the people that we do. So what do you want to do? Do we do you want to carry on creating an income for a lot of families, or do you want to slog your guts out? There's so many different dynamics to it. And then I suppose what we've been looking at recently is the idea of diversification, but throughout our whole farming system. Everything really starts with the soil. And actually, if you've got a really good, diverse soil base, and it feels like we've got to this position backwards. So we were looking at like cheese, and we were going, well, we really want to be brilliant in raw milk cheese. What is it about raw milk cheese that is really positive? And actually, it goes down to the diversity of bacteria that's in the milk in the first place. Where the bloody hell did that come from? We spent a fortune on like sending our milk off to a laboratory to have an understanding of where this, what are these bacterias? You know, lactobacillus bacteria, but what type and where do they come from? How do they actually get into the milk in the first place? And the more we looked into it, the more we found, okay, well, it's environmentally based. So it's not necessarily a easy link about what the cows are eating will impact the flavour of the cheese and the milk. It's actually the environment around the whole farming system that has the biggest impact. If you have diversification in your soil microflora, and there's a really good network and community working together in that soil, then the grass and what you're growing in that will have its own biodiversity. And so that's not just biodiversity in like insect life or wildlife, but it's bacterial life that's growing on the plants. And things like, if the cow is out to grass, then she's going to be lying down in the grass, which then inoculates the udder, which then when you put the cluster on will actually inoculate the milk. Right, okay, so that's where that is coming from. And then, you know, you look back to early cheese making, and they never used to use starter culture. You know, how the bloody hell do you make cheese without starter culture? Well, actually, if you look at it in the environment, it's all there to begin with. You know, you've got lactobacillus growing on all these different plants and actually getting into the milk. So I always kind of describe milk as similar to like cider making, basically. So with cider, you have the sugars on the inside of the apple and you've got the yeast on the outside. Squeeze the two together and they ferment. With milk, you have it's relatively sterile in the actual udder itself, but then when it mixes with the external bits and, you know, like the equipment and the environment, then you have that seeding of the milk with the lactobacillus bacteria, and then it wants to ferment.
I really don't like huge herds of cows. I really don't. What I like is about 180, 200 cows, one person feeling a personal identity to that herd of cows. I don't really want people just sticking on tit cups. You know, you want people thinking about what they're doing, interested breeding, so they've each got their. We don't create any rivalry, but I try not to create any rivalry between the two. But then they can in general do pretty well their own breeding thing if they what they want to within parameters. And of course, the other big change has been going from Holsteins to the Dairy Shorthorn, and that was a huge thing. But we got Raymond, the more, say, traditional herdsman, to actually help choose that breed, and he was very influential in that because we'd had a big TB outbreak, and he and his partner do quite a lot of agriculture shows, and I said, while you're at the shows, go and have a look around and see what breed would fit in that would do everything we want and be more hardy, because Holstein's a bit like an F1 racing car. I always think, you know, that it's quite tall. If you push it, and it needs high octane fuel to keep going. Yeah. I think we've proved that they're more resistant and they will graze far better than ever I thought. But you've still got these issues that they're more difficult to get in a calf, higher vet bills. So we could probably reduce the yield a bit, not too much, and have a more robust cow that will cost less on vet bills, will last longer.
Would the Dairy Shorthorn have been the cow of choice round here traditionally?
Oh, very much so. It would. Though we are using, admittedly, the Dairy Shorthorn we're using have got inside in them a bit of Holstein in them, okay, not to go too extreme. But yes, they would very much so. I think if you saw a picture of the old farmyard, they would have been pretty well like Shorthorns.
species herbal ley mix. At the moment we've got lots of different grasses, 7 grasses, 7 legumes, 5 herbs. Then we've got lots of other stuff coming up.
Presumably, these areas
Yeah.
will just get more and more
They'll
cover
fill in,
and
yeah.
fill and
They should fill in with creeping plants like white clover and bird's foot trefoil, they're both legumes.
So you're bringing a bit of electric fence up the hill. What are we?
I'm going to split this paddock.
Yeah.
This is a 2 hectare paddock, just over 2 hectares. I'm going to split it in 2. The cows will have this lower end tomorrow, and then when I get the cows in tomorrow afternoon for milking, I'll take the fence down, this temporary electric fence, and on Friday they'll have the rest of it, and then they'll move on.
So they're only really on these pastures for a couple of days at a time. Okay.
And then I follow with the dry cows who mop up after the milking herd, which has been
well received.
Not generally, no.
And why is that?
So I think it's so different.
What?
Following the dry cows to the milking herd.
Yeah, it's the one thing that I'm sort of slightly. I think it's working, but it's one thing that I was quite surprised we did, and I'm not. I think it would work well here. I don't think I would attempt to do it down on the other farm at the moment.
We had nowhere to put them, and so I'd read a lot about it. It's called leader-follower grazing. So you could, one thing, people would have 3 different groups. They'd have the young stock go in to this for a couple of days, and the young stock would just nibble the leafy bits and not take very much off. Then the milking herd comes in and takes an awful lot of it down, then you follow it with the dry cows. But 3 groups is really difficult to manage.
And also there'd be a bit of a worm burden for the young stock next time they went round.
Yeah, unless you had it like slow farming do, which is 30 days rotation. So you rest the paddock for 30 days.
I mean, if I hadn't agreed, I said we can't. But I think it's worth a try, and we probably do it here. I think certainly at the other farm, if I was to introduce that and paddocks next year, that would probably be one step too far.
And that's one step too far for the team, or one step too far for the land or the animals?
Because I'm not 100% convinced about it, so not so convinced I'd force it onto someone who didn't particularly want to do it. And I think probably to get the paddock system working properly is going to be a challenge on its own without adding that. Wouldn't you agree, Nick?
Yes. We've now freed up 30 acres up on that hill up there that we've got heifers on, so the ones who are going to be calving down this summer and autumn. And that's worked quite well because they're always generally a bit too tight through the summer for grass, so they should be calving down in a lot better condition. But yes, this is certainly so far. I mean, it was tight, I admit. It was tight at the beginning of the year.
But it was tight for everyone
because
the grass wasn't growing. So I mean, to be fair, it's had quite a hard start. Not a normal, I would say, start. Maybe it's what the future with climate warming is going to be like. But and again, a lot of what we're doing is in trying to be ahead of climate warming and things.
And maybe that tough start breeds in a bit of resilience to the pasture.
I mean, as a conventional farmer, looking at this, I would have, a few years ago, say, looks a bloody good mess to me. But look at it now, I think it's really, really good.
Fumes are drawing nitrogen from the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Just as they do when they're making nitrogen fertiliser in the factory. The atmosphere, I think, is 77% nitrogen, what we're breathing in right now. So the process of extracting nitrogen from the air to make nitrogen fertiliser, it's kind of just a man-made version of what legumes like clovers and peas and bird's foot trefoils and lucernes do, which is they draw it down and then they interact with soil bacteria and they create nitrogen. They fix nitrogen in the soil, and then it means it's making available nitrogen then to the other plants in the soil, like the grasses who aren't fixing nitrogen.
But if there's a massive burst of it, then presumably physically they can't.
Yeah, but I'm not in any way an expert on it, but from what I gather, it just renders them. They don't need to do that fixing anymore.
One
they
of,
just kind
one of the
of almost
things you
become
can
dormant.
do is if you think the clover is dominating a sward, you can stick a load of nitrogen on it. Can't you, Nick?
Yeah.
And that will then reduce the amount of clover and bring the grasses on. I mean, not that we've ever done that, but you can get, some of our staff think, oh, well, we're going to get overburdened with clover, with too much of it.
But the wonderful thing about clover is, this is why it's so good. It's interesting driving past railway field just now, seeing it all greening up and the clover really coming back, because this is the time of clover. As the grass goes back in the summer, grass loves the spring and loves the autumn flush, but it doesn't like the heat and a lot of sunlight through the summer. So that's what the clover loves. So it's a case of flattening instead of having this great big silage peak in the spring and then dropping it down all of a sudden through the summer and then having a little lift in September, we get a much flatter profile.
Because you've always got something kind of.
Yeah, so we then, and this
growing.
is the basis of herbal laser in many ways, is you just get an even.
It's like
level of growth.
succession planting in kind of flower beds, I suppose.
Yeah, I
you have
suppose
something
so,
coming
yeah.
up and going
Yeah.
down in different parts of the
I
year.
think what we've also done is we have put a little bit of nitrogen on some of the cutting clover layers in the spring, because another thing we're doing is a multi-cut system. We've been doing it for some time. So whereas years ago we did done maybe 3 big cuts of silage, and we'd probably done the last cut of silage towards the end of May. Now we do the first cut of silage, and we're trying to go around where the weather lets us about every 4 to 5 weeks, and taking small cuts, high quality stuff. This is really good here, isn't it?
Yeah.
But then what I can't see, Nick, is can you point out some of the different bits?
Yes, well there's white clover, there's red clover, there's Alsica clover, or however you pronounce it. There's plantain,
Is that shepherd's purse?
shepherd's purse.
Is that?
No, that's burnet in the vegetative
Oh, I see.
state. I don't know what that grass is. I think that's an indigenous population. Haven't been able to identify that yet. You see it everywhere. Yeah, we've got chicory, which we seem to grow really. Not chicory, plantain, which we seem to grow really well. This kind of big ribbed leaf. And then you've got chicory, which is this one that's not got the ribs. What else we got? We've got plantain as seeding there.
Well,
There's sheep's parsley there. Cows love that.
when I started farming, I had this, actually of usable acres, about 180 acres, and I used to buy 100 tonnes of nitrogen. Now we've got, about 900 acres in total, but of usable acres, probably about 600, and this year I'm buying 60 tonnes.
Right.
So that's the difference.
Yeah, that's
And I don't think we're going to use all of that.
No.
I think I bought 10, instead of buying a full lorry load, I bought 10 tonnes the other day just in case. So I thought I was going to have to go around the wheat again. But I don't think I have. So, what do you think about that? Is it sound right? Or?
Yeah. Well, I'd rather not use it. And I'm pretty positive that, there's a lot of science coming out that it is detrimental massively to soil biology. And so we don't really know what we're missing out on, but you're kind of hooked on it because you're scared of what life is like without it. I mean, certainly this spring we would have really struggled because it was so cold. If it had been a normal spring, we wouldn't have needed to use much.
I think last year I cut the nitrogen down a bit. Well, I've used less nitrogen this year, but I think I've used it more strategically. And because I didn't use it strategically enough last year, we would have been short of silage. To be honest, if we hadn't lost a lot of cows to TB, we would have been short of silage. And I've said I don't want to get short of silage, because if we are, then we've got to buy silage in from someone who's doing God knows what. It's a bit the same with milk. And so, I think it's important that we use it strategically, and I think, and not much, but really think about where we're putting it on. And,
Yeah.
and
But that's what we were talking about earlier up the top, is this idea of, there isn't kind of one size fits all. You're kind of being quite selective which, you know, there's a shared thing there. You're being very selective and reactive over, you know, what sort of the ground is telling you, but maybe you're approaching it with, you know, you're going, well, we're going to use some nitrogen. You're saying, well, we just need to take that leap of faith and see what will happen if we don't.
Yeah, this is certainly not a year to take it. No.
But we debate
No.
it.
Yeah.
I mean, I won't go and put on any nitrogen without talking to Nick and Tom. I tend to get a more of a, no, we shouldn't use it, definitely, result from Tom, because he's not out here seeing the grass growing all the time. And Nick and I will debate it.
Yeah, and I go bollocks.
Yeah, but
He's probably
I mean,
right
yeah.
on this occasion.
Well, it was because the thing with nitrogen is, as we've seen there's a field over towards Westcombe that is very, very white clover based silage lay, and Richard all through the spring was saying it looks dreadful over there. It's really, really bad. Nothing's growing. And then, as soon as the weather got warm, about 2 weeks ago, it's just rocketed because it's clover weather. So it's difficult because the spring was so cold. The nitrogen fertiliser works at above 4 degrees Celsius, whereas it needs to be a hell of a lot warmer for the clover to kick in. So if we want to get that early cut, which we do want to do because we get a better quality silage, and we do this multi-cut silage, and we do need to get that early cut in, and because we have such high quality silage, it's high in energy, protein, and also digestibility, so the cows want to eat it and they just digest it well and utilise its nutrients better. That means that we're not using anywhere near so much concentrate. So it's, I don't know, it's 6 of one, half dozen the other. We're then going to just import loads of concentrate from God knows where. Well, the components that concentrate comes from Yeovil, doesn't it? It's made there, but the ingredients could be coming from just down the road in Sherburn, or it could be coming from God knows where.
So if next year we have a slightly more clement spring, then this might be a conversation that tips in a different direction.
I think, you know, the great thing is, as we're not organic, you've got an arsenal of tools, as Nick was saying earlier on, that you can use, but you think about it. Whereas, I suppose in years past, I would phone up the agronomist and say, what do I do? And off I went, because I was really busy doing other things as well. And, you know, the people on the farm, I wouldn't have had that discussion because they were very conventional. Now we question it, and Tom used to question it, but because he was probably mainly involved with the cheese, and although he's got a lot of farming experience, it's far more. I mean, I know more about farming than he does, and I don't know anything like what he knows about cheese, you know, and that's why the two of us work well together. But you know, but Nick we can have a debate with him being sort of not exactly intermediary, but you know, we can debate it round in a sensible way, I think, which is, you know, rather than
crisis counsellor.
Well, no, I don't say that. I would say a mediator.
Mediator.
But we never sort of row about it. But yeah, we do have comment. I don't use any at all. No, but that's silly. We've got to use some. You know.
But in practical sense, you need people who kind of see both sides of it, and you also need the time to have those conversations. And how easy is that? First of all, to find the right people, because, you know, there was a time before Nick worked here. And how easy is it to carve out that time to have these, what were we calling them, debates?
I think we seem to manage it, don't we, really?
Yeah. I mean, Richard's in the parlour every morning. About 5:30.
Which is not ideal because he's milking, but I'd like to avoid it. But it's tricky because once I go round and sort, as you'll see when you come round with me next time, he's going to do a morning round.
Okay.
You know, so we do. And I mean, Tom and I would debate. We try not, well, we do try not to talk about it when we're like, he's my son as well. Not Mel and Tessa would say not enormously successfully maybe, but we do manage to have days when we don't talk about it.
If we achieve the best cheese that we possibly can, we might as well give it up because we've done it, you know. There's no point to it anymore. So that's a quest that I think we've all accepted that is just an unachievable quest because, you know, it's such a complicated equation. And also, what's beyond that? You know, when you finished the race and you've won, like, what then?
I hope you enjoyed episode 1 of the Westcombe Project. There's a lot of wisdom in farmers and food producers. It's not just applicable to cheese making for sure. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any other episodes. But also, I'll be visiting various other farms over the coming months to bring you the very best in food and farming from here in the UK. Thank you for watching.